Welcome back to another episode of Warren Cali. In this episode, I'm going to detail the story of Oakland drug dealer, King Ant. Many black people arrived in Oakland en masse between 1940 and 1970, which is called the Second Great Migration. This was a result of black people leaving the American South during the time of the Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation. Local jobs in the Bay, particularly during the World War II era, such as shipyard work, offered black Americans middle-class wages, and by 1980, Oakland, California had a population of 47% black people. Oakland was home to the Black Rights Organization, the Black Panther Party. Students Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party in 1966, which emphasized black nationalism and advocated armed self-defense against police and was involved in several events that ended in death of police officers. The Black Panthers brought a lot of good to the urban community. Among their social programs were feeding children and providing other services to the needy, along with a host of successful programs and giving a sense of identity and structure to the black community. But the Black Panthers, which were later spread all across America, was taken down by the government, and by the 80s, this left Oakland black community in a frenzy. In Oakland, when the rest of the world would be affected by the new drug that took over the urban communities, and it was called crack. Many families will become destroyed, with many parents becoming addicts and many youths becoming drug dealers. Drug dealers began fighting for control of many projects, streets, and turfs, creating drug wars all over America, making the 80s and 90s some of the bloodiest times in history of America. Now, Oakland had many prominent drug dealers and street legends, most notably people like Felix Mitchell, Little D, Mickey Moore, and the list goes on. Now, Ant Flowers, who would later gain the name King Ant, was born around 1965 and was raised in East Oakland, which would become a war zone in the 80s and 90s. You had drug kingpins like Felix Mitchell and Mickey Moore's crews began fighting against each other to control the drug trade of Oakland, leading to deaths on both sides. Felix Mitchell was the man who started everything, law enforcement officers would say. He was running Oakland's first large drug scale in the late 70s and early 80s. Felix Mitchell sparked the first city drug war, and he caught the attention of federal agents in August of 1980, when 6 gang-related killings occurred over 3 days. These killings were casualties of war between Felix Mitchell's the mob and also Mickey Moore's the family, a gang that sprung up to challenge Felix Mitchell's control of the drug trade. Both Mickey Moore and Felix Mitchell would be arrested a year later and sentenced to lengthy sentences, but Felix Mitchell would later be killed in prison in 1986. The 80s spawned an entire generation of killers and dealers, and young men like King Ant, who tried to follow example of several former drug kingpins on how to hit it big. One of the biggest drug dealers of the newer generation of Oakland will be a drug dealer named Little D, who I did a previous episode about. If you haven't seen that, check that episode out. Little D will form a crew called LDI. Little D came from Felix Mitchell's reign, being his nephew, but Little D's reign will also be short-lived, and he'll be arrested and serve a lengthy sentence. Others will take over the reins of LDI's crew, like Timothy Blewett, and a young member of LDI will be King Ant. King Ant will work for years under LDI, building his name up on the streets of Oakland. He was putting in work and drug dealing. A fistfight at a spring 1989 picnic and barbecue in Oakland sprouted into a full-blown 2.5-year war for power in the Bay Area's drug war. While members of the infamous LDI gang gathered to eat and socialized at Oakland's Diamond Park in early May of 1989, LDI lieutenants King Ant and Eric Squeeze Smith would come to blows, with Squeeze allegedly getting the best of King Ant. This situation would change the gang makeup of Oakland. In the wake of this embarrassing incident, King Ant decided to go off on his own and go find his own crew, which would become a rival to LDI. The next round of Oakland drug wars began, with killings and shootings so frequent, it was hard for police to keep up. Federal authorities arrested Timothy Blewett in 1991, but the violence between the two gangs and the eventual third gang, ran by a man named Emmanuel Lacey, continued. King Ant operated until an intensive wiretap investigation gave federal authorities the ammunition they needed to put him away. Prosecutors will say that King Ant ran the East Oakland cocaine trafficking organization from 1988 to 1994. King Ant was arrested for drug conspiracy and distribution. King Ant and his brother Sammy were among 46 people arrested in 1994 in the East Bay law enforcement suite, targeting major gangs suspected of controlling the cocaine trade in Oakland. But King's Ant attorney would say that her client had no prior felonies, and she said that King Ant is no kingpin. In the worst light, he was a buyer and a seller, she said, but he certainly wasn't anybody's leader of anything or a kingpin. Oakland's mayor at the time, Jerry Brown, wanted to get all drug dealers long sentences, so King Ant was one of the people he wanted the most. He would go to King's Ant trial and make his voice known. King's aunt, White Barbara, told Jerry Brown, "I have to tell my children." Jerry Brown made sure their father could never come back home to see his kids, and Jerry sat there in silence but was pleased with the outcome of the trial. King Ant was sentenced to 28 years in prison in 1999. Police will say he was the last in a line of kingpins from that era. This will conclude this episode. If you haven't already, check out my previous episodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.